Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to the channel. This is your host, Young Brando, reporting back to you from a beautiful, very pleasant Los Angeles night. I hope you are all doing well. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Lennon Patek that has quickly become the talk of the town today. Of course, it's a watch that we knew. It's a watch that had an established existence, had really even an outsized presence in the collective conscience of watch collectors because of the ubiquity of this particular photo. But it was also one of those watches, one of those celebrity watches that had been mysteriously misplaced. Let's put it like that. Um, Sugar Ray Robinson's 1518, that was a pink gold example, which makes it all the more rare, to me remains the alpha and omega of that particular genre of the lost celebrity watches. But John Lennon Patek, probably more broadly, is the watch. And once the situation is settled, and if it finally ends up on a well publicized public auction, it might break the record that is, of course, held by the Paul Newman Daytona until now. That means we're talking about a watch that is potentially worth more than $18 million. The estimates so far have ranged from 10 to 40 million. No one will quite know. The current situation is actually a matter that will be finally decided by the Swiss equivalent of the Supreme Court. The ownership is contested. And I do want to actually read to you from the J. Fielden article that was published in the New Yorker with the title "In Search of Lost Time." Obviously, after Marcel Proust's famous novel, that was how the print edition titled it. And in the online edition, it's called The Strange Journey of John Lennon's Stolen Patek Philippe Watch. I have posted about this on Instagram, so if you would like to check it out there, that would be great. If not, let me read to you a little bit from what was made available on the New Yorker. This is an article by Jay Fielden, who really does a great job in unearthing all these finer, granular details of the historical backgrounds behind the gift of this watch by Yoko Ono to her husband, John Lennon. And also, again, the article does a great job in giving the lay of the land regarding the situation of the watch today. Apparently, this was a photo taken by Bob Gruen, who is an entertainment photographer. And it famously features the Beatle flaunting the watch on his wrist and probably wearing a knitted tie, which apparently was knit by Yoko Ono herself as a gift to him as well, along with an American flag pin on that tie, which it turns out kind of memorializes an anniversary of his gaining American citizenship. I'm talking about John Lennon. So here is the article. For years, John Lennon's Patek Philippe 2499 has been the El Dorado of lost watches. Lennon was known for collecting expensive things, apartments in the Dakota, 5, guitars. One apartment was mainly for musical equipment, country estates, jukeboxes, and Egyptian artifacts, including a gold-leaf sarcophagus containing a mummified princess who Yoko Ono believed was a former self. But the Patek appears to have been his one and only wristwatch. I think that was one of the important finds of this particular piece. And that was the angle I took in the quick Instagram reel that I shot, since I find it quite ironic that someone who basically translated the Communist Manifesto into musical formats would wear one of the most prestigious watches of all time on his wrist. It's just that sort of delicious cognitive dissonance that we love on this channel when exploring the more emotional and affective aspects of horology. A gift from Ono, the watch is more than anyone would ever need to tell the time. A perpetual calendar chronograph, it is, as Paul Botros, the head of watches at the American arm of the Philips auction house, says, a mechanical microcomputer, the most sought after of all Pateks. Between 1952 and around 1985, Patek produced just 349 of them. The watch, which Ono bought at Tiffany on Fifth Avenue, records time in 8 different ways. The dial houses 3 aperture, day, month, moon phase, and 3 subdials, seconds, elapsed minutes, and date. That is another detail, as it turns out, because even though you could more or less make out and think that the watch was bought from Tiffany and Company on Fifth Avenue, since it was presumably bought in New York, since Yoko Ono had access to that boutique. But this recovered picture, an auction listing from which the watch was actually pulled back in the early 2000s, actually testifies to that fact, because it proudly carries that much vaunted signature at 6 o'clock, Tiffany and Company. And also the watch is properly inscribed on the case back, just like Starting Over Love, Yoko, October 9th, 1980, New York City. As you can see, the watch is in impeccable condition, at least in this picture, which is from roughly 2 decades ago. But we will learn soon enough from the article that the watch has been preserved quite nicely in escrow, so to speak. But we are gonna get to that. If you never memorized the mnemonic 30 days hath September, no worries, the 2499 Patek hath. Its miraculous ganglia of tiny wheels and levers will adjust its readings to the quirky imperfections of the Gregorian calendar, including leap years. No other watchmaker was able to produce a perpetual calendar chronograph movement small enough to fit into a wristwatch until 1985. And of course, they're talking there about the IWC, Da Vinci Perpetual Chrono IWC Da Vinci Perpetual Calendar Chronograph that was introduced in 1985, which was only the second watch of that kind in serial production, and made possible, of course, with the help of Kurt Klaus's ingenious module that allowed a utilitarian and thrifty version of the movement to be produced on the base of a Valjoux 7750. What makes this $24.99 even rarer and perhaps the most valuable wristwatch in existence is how little we know about it. Ono gave it to her husband for his 40th birthday, October 9th, 1980, 2 months before he was fatally shot by a deranged man outside the Dakota. For the next 3 decades, the existence of the watch remained unknown except to a handful of family and close friends. But sometime around 2007, in the early days of social media, a new kind of watch obsessive materialized, equipped with native computer skills and an appreciation for the places where pop culture and the luxury market intersect. In those pre-Instagram years, fanboy wonks traded watch esoterica online, an image of Picasso wearing a lost Chez Lecoutre, Castro with 2 trendy Rolexes strapped to one arm, Brando on the set of Apocalypse Now, flexing, as watch geeks say, a Rolex GMT Master without its timing bezel, a modification he made to better inhabit the role of Kurtz. This is something that I wrote about, by the way, and I had never seen it quoted elsewhere. So I'm guessing Jay Fielden has something to credit me for, which of course he never will. That's the case. But anyway, we will survive and we will persist. And the Google image search find of them all 2 frames of an uncredited snapshot of Lennon and his Patek. This is another picture also captured by Bob Gruen with John Lennon on the same day, tying that knitted tie with the $24.99 on the wrist. Since its discovery around 2011, the image has appeared online again and again, fueling a speculative frenzy about the watch, which cost around $25,000 at Tiffany in 1980 at the time of purchase, might bring at auction today, with estimates ranging from $10 million to $40 million. A bunch of information about watch indexes, which I'm not really too hot about, which concludes by saying in 2017, famously, Paul Newman's Rolex Daytona broke records by selling at auction for $17.8 million. Hey, Harkin, how are you, my friend? It's nice to see you there. But all the clickbait posts about the Lennon Patek, as it had come to be known, were regurgitations that contained few facts. There was never a mention of who took the photo, where it was taken, or even where the watch might be. And this is where Jay Fielden comes in with his research, which is well appreciated. During the long, dull days of the pandemic, I decided to see, Jay Fielden says, what I could find out. Several years went by as I traced the journey of the watch from where it was stowed away after Lennon's death, a locked room in his Dakota apartment to when it was stolen, apparently in 2005. From there, it moved around Europe and the watch departments of two auction houses before becoming subject of an ongoing lawsuit in Switzerland to determine whether the watch's rightful owner is Ono or an unnamed man a Swiss court judgment refers to as Mr. A, who claims to have bought the watch legally in 2014. Having reached its final appeal, Ono has so far prevailed. The case is now in the hands of the Tribunal Fédéral, Switzerland's Supreme Court, which is expected to render a verdict later this year. Meanwhile, the watch continues to sit in an undisclosed location in Geneva, a city that specializes in the safe, secret storage of lost treasures. A euphemism if I ever saw one, but we will just take that as read. Lennon holding up his birthday Patek in the fall of 1980 is one of the happiest moments captured on film in the final years of his life. That summer, he had begun making music again during a trip to Bermuda, which he had hoped would repair the well-publicized strain in his marriage to Ono. Lennon's lost weekend, more than a year spent living in Los Angeles with May Pang, a former assistant who became his lover, was not that far in the past, and Ono had fallen into an infatuation with an art world socialite named Sam Green. It was in Bermuda that Lennon wrote, "I'm losing you." Lennon had spent the previous 5 years holed up in the Dakota as a self-proclaimed house husband, raising his son Sean so that Ono, whom Lennon called mother, could take her turn at being the decision maker of the music business enterprise they had named Lennon. While Ono dealt with Beatles' headaches, controlled the purse strings, and invested in real estate, Lennon occupied himself by watching soap operas, eating bran biscuits and rice, smoking gitan, and listening to either classical music or music. If I heard anything bad, he later explained, I'd want to fix it. And if I heard anything good, I'd wonder why I hadn't thought of it. In the photograph, Lennon, trim and fit from a macrobiotic diet, wears jeans and a loosely knotted striped knit tie adorned with a jewel-encrusted American flag pin. The picture was taken in the Hit Factory, where he and Ono had been recording Double Fantasy, his first album in 5 years. The room is dim, but he has on sunglasses, celluloid horn rims, recently bought in Japan. Buckled on his left wrist is the Patek 2499. Thanks, man. I'm doing great too. In order to find more about the photograph, I tracked down Jack Douglas, the noted record producer who oversaw Double Fantasy, and sent him the picture by email. He replied right away. Bob Gruen took the photo, he wrote, referring to the well-known documenter of the 70s and 80s rock scene. When I contacted Gruen, who is now 78 and lives in New York City, he had no idea that his photograph had become the talk of the horological world or why he had never been given credit for it. He had published the image in a book titled John Lennon, The New York Years in 2005. But he remembered the night he took the photo, Lennon's 40th birthday. Since late that summer, Lennon and Ono had been spending a lot of time in a multi-room studio on the 6th floor of the Hit Factory building, then on West 48th Street. I was one of the few people who had an open invitation, Gruen told me. They liked to work late. Gruen, who said he was living on a steak and cognac diet those days, showed up after midnight, having attended the 36th birthday party of the singer Nona Hendryx. I thought I'd bring Joan a piece of her birthday cake, he said. When Grun arrived, Lennon was enjoying his presents, the knit tie which Ono had made herself, a copy of the one he wore at school in Liverpool, the flag pin, the Patek in yellow gold, which had a rare and highly coveted double stamped dial, meaning that both the watchmakers and Tiffany's logos were printed on it. This is a little bit of an historical, let's say, retrofitting, because obviously at that time it was relatively normal and not necessarily desirable to have the retailer signature on the dial of such prestige pieces. It was not a Tiffany exclusive as it has become today for Patek Philippe, and it was most certainly perhaps not even something that was sought after in the watch world. It's just you want to buy a Patek Philippe from New York, you buy it from Tiffany and Company, you want to buy one in Zurich, you buy it from Bayer, which has their stamp, you want to buy one from Lucerne, you get it from Gubelin, which has their stamp, you want to buy one in South America, you might actually get it in Caracas, Venezuela, and that would have a Serpico y Laino stamp. You might get something in Milan with the Gobbi stamp, so on and so forth. I don't want to get carried away too much. Let's continue with Fielden's story. Grun remembered Lennon being abuzz over the tie and the pin, a nod to Lennon's 4th anniversary as a green card holder. My mistake, I had said citizenship, but apparently it was just a green card. He doesn't recall talking about the watch. Grun doesn't recall talking about the watch with Lennon, but Lennon nonetheless strapped the black lizard band onto his wrist, when Grun reached for his Olympus OM4. A few other photographs that Grun took that week have never been seen by the public. One shows Lennon at a mixing board with Douglas, who is wearing a recognizable watch himself, a Porsche design chronograph 1, stainless steel, coated in black, DLC coated, which Porsche had presented to him and to the members of Aerosmith in 1976 after the band's German tour for its album Rocks. Douglas told me that he and Lennon later wrist-checked each other. Although I thought his watch was beautiful, he wrote in an email to me, I told John it didn't have the pizzazz of my Black Beauty. And we had a good laugh. Obviously, who is laughing now? After Lennon's death, Ono had a full inventory taken of her husband's possessions, a document that amounted to a nearly 1,000 pages. She then put the Patek in a locked room of her apartment, and there the watch remained for more than 20 years. Fielden continues, I found a clue as to what happened next by putting together shards of information from various members of the watch intelligentsia who had all heard that the Patek had been stolen. The plot thickens. This is the backstory of that famous Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph that belonged to John Lennon, as it has been memorialized by that famous photograph. Let's continue, if you had just tuned in. I think the guy was Turkish, one said. Another remembered something about a chauffeur. This led me to a 2006 article in the Times about a man named Koral Karsan, Turkish, Czech, who had served as Ono's chauffeur, Czech 2, for the previous 10 years. Karsan a veteran member of Ono's oft-shuffled staff, trusted enough that he had full access to her apartment, had simply gone berserk in December of that year, threatening to release embarrassing photos and private conversations he had been recording unless Ono paid him $2 million. He allegedly said that if she refused, he would have her and Sean killed. Sean, of course, being John Lennon and Yoko Ono's son. A tall, square-jawed man with a thick burr of white hair, Karsan, then 50, was arrested. In a series of preliminary hearings in a Manhattan courtroom, he defended himself against the charges of extortion and attempted grand larceny by claiming, as the Times reported, that Ono had humiliated and degraded him, wrecking his marriage and making him so nervous that he ground 8 of his teeth to the bone. A letter he had written to Ono describing himself as her driver, bodyguard, assistant, butler, nurse, handyman, and more so, your lover and confidant was also entered into the record. Ono disputed Karsan's claims about a romance, but the prosecution allowed him to plead guilty to a lesser charge, and he was ordered to return to his native Turkey. According to a story that Karsan would later tell, Ono, who was known to consult psychics, became worried one day in 2006 that a forecasted heavy weather event might endanger some meaningful Lennon items, including 2 pairs of Lennon's eyeglasses and several New Yorker desk diaries, which he used as journals during the last 5 years of his life. She asked Karsan to find a safer place to keep them. Unbeknownst to Ono, when Karsan was subsequently deported, these items, along with the Patek, followed him. Ono, who is 91 and lives in seclusion in upstate New York, declined to comment. Of Karsan, Sean Lennon told me he took advantage of a widow at a vulnerable time. Of all the incidents of people stealing things from my parents, this one is the most painful. Karsan, back in Turkey, was in the market for a house. Around 2009, he showed Lennon's watch to a Turkish friend visiting from Berlin named Erhan G, as he came to be known owing to a German privacy law. Karsan let Erhan G flip through the diaries, including one marked 1980, which includes Lennon's final entry. Karsan threw out an idea. He would give the Lennon Patek to Erhan G as collateral for a loan. Erhan G agreed. One evening in 2013 in Berlin, Erhan G met an executive who worked for a new, much-hyped digital auction platform called Auctionata. He couldn't resist boasting about the Patek 2499 and the rest of the Lennon trove, some 80 items. In short order, a dinner was arranged with Oliver Hoffmann, Auctionata's 28-year-old director of watches. He told me the story of how he had gotten the watch, Hoffmann recalled, of his meeting with Erhan G. It was strange, but it felt whole and true. It was credible because of the many details. Erhan G, who said that he was the watch's rightful owner per an agreement with Karsan, didn't strike Hoffmann as a man desperate for money. He owned a successful business and lived in a large apartment in a building close to Potsdamer Platz, Hoffmann said. Erhan G could not be reached for comment. Living in large apartments in urban centers of Central Europe would cost you, for sure. Auctionata, which live-streamed its auctions, was one of Germany's dot-com darlings, lauded in the press for disrupting the old auction house model dominated by Christie's and Sotheby's, which had yet to develop a digital-first business. And as you guys know from the last spring season in Geneva, they are still experiencing certain birth pangs, so to speak. They have still not perfected the digital side of their business. Investors include Groupe Arnon, Holzbrink Ventures, and Hearst Ventures had put up more than $100 million of venture capital for the company. Hoffman says that the CEO, Alexander Zacke, recognized what a publicity boon selling John Lennon's lost watch would be and pushed for a way to do it with or without notifying Ono. Zacke did not respond to a request for comments. Teams of lawyers studied the watch's provenance and puzzled over how to offer it for sale without raising eyebrows. A document called an extract was obtained from Patek Philippe, which meant the watch had not been registered as stolen. And Carson himself traveled to Berlin, where he signed the document in front of a notary testifying that Ono had given him her husband's Patek as a gift in 2005. So that something to clarify there. They did obtain an archival extract from Patek Philippe, and the fact that they were able to receive such a document from Patek means that the watch has not been flagged as stolen, has not been reported as stolen, right? Because if it had been registered as stolen, that would actually raise some alarm with Patek, and such an extract would not be issued, to say the least. As for the authenticity of the watch, there was no doubt. On the case back is an identifying inscription that has never been made public outside of Germany. In late 2013, in preparation for an auction, Auctionata had the watch professionally photographed. In the photo, the watch floats in a vacuum, a carefully lit token of commerce, divorced from all human and emotional context. And you can see the photograph of that watch if you want to take a look at my Instagram post while I go through the article here. But Erhan G got cold feet. Some years earlier, Ono had sued a former employee who had slipped out of the Dakota with Lennon memorabilia. Frederick Seaman, Lennon's last personal assistant, confessed to having stolen diaries similar, if not identical, to those which Karsan and Erhan G had stashed away. He later returned them. Searching for a private buyer, Hoffman approached Mr. A man he knew from the rare watch circuit. A deal by private treaty, a sale undisclosed to the public, was reached, and in March 2014, Mr. A agreed that he would consign a selection of Rolex and Patek watches from his own collection, whose sale proceeds would go toward payments for the Lennon 2499, which was priced at 600,000 euros, about $800,000 now. Or rather, perhaps at the time, because nowadays it's a little closer to parity, I believe. This, in some ways, was more helpful than auctioning the watch, Hoffman told me, explaining that Auctionata's watch department needed the inventory. The vintage watches Mr. A consigned, most of it which Hoffman valued at between 20,000 and 40,000 euros a piece, were in total likely worth more than the 2499. Mr. A told Hoffman that he planned to keep Lennon's watch in his collection, which has included pieces owned by Eric Clapton. But within months, he took the Lennon Patek to the Geneva office of Christie's. This particular move will become decisive. As part of the auction house's appraisal process, a Christie's representative reached out to Ono's lawyer, who promptly notified his clients. Ono rushed to check the locked room, only to discover that the Patek wasn't there. She had no idea how long it had been gone. In August of 2023, a reporter named Colleen Emel, who works for a small but enterprising website in Switzerland called Gotham City, found something interesting in a backlog of documents filed that summer by the Chambre Civile in the canton of Geneva, an appellate judgment in a civil case that had been going on for 5 years. European privacy laws, especially those in Switzerland, make legal documents unusually hard to decipher. The Swiss judiciary uses a system of letters and numbers to create pseudonyms for appellants, respondents, and anyone else involved, turning a case file into a cryptogram. Emil knew enough about Beatles' history to recognize that C, widow of late F, of Japanese nationality and domiciled in New York City, was in fact Yoko Ono. Although the appeals court affirmed the lower court's decision that Ono was the sole legitimate owner of the watch, Mr. A watch collector and longtime professional in the sector of Italian nationality, was launching another appeal. Emil posted a brief synopsis on Gotham City, along with the news that a final judgment was now being awaited from the Swiss Supreme Courts. Mystery solved was the gist of the message that ricocheted around the watch world. But to me, Jay Fielden says, the mystery had only deepened. The basic itinerary of the Patek's Odyssey and its current location had been discovered, but the human detail of how it had passed from wrist to wrist, hiding place to hiding place, still hadn't been reported. What's more, where had Ono ever got the idea of giving a guy like John Lennon, eater of carob-coated peanuts, singer of a song about imagining no possessions, peacenik, a watch that was a status symbol of lockjawed good taste? And what was its famously secret inscription? I hope you guys are still interested in this story. Please feel free to write your reactions in the chat. Feel free to jump on the panel if you would like to read this with me, if you would like to help me read it perhaps, but I will try to soldier on until, if and when, let's say, something like that happens. This is how Jay Fielden's article about John Lennon's lost Patek Philippe perpetual calendar continues. If you are just now tuning in, we're talking about the story published earlier today on the New Yorker about John Lennon's Patek Philippe reference 2499J, which was a personal gift from his wife, Yoko Ono, merely a couple of months before his tragic death. I had already been in contact with Mr. A. 3 days before Emil posted her scoop, he had canceled a planned meeting with me in Italy. Instead, we arranged to speak over Zoom. Seated in a paneled room, he told me that when Ono had found the watch missing, her counsel demanded its return. It was a tricky legal situation because Ono, having never realized that the watch was gone, hadn't reported it stolen. And because the case spanned several national jurisdictions, Mr. A explained that he didn't return the watch because he didn't believe it to be stolen property. And I think that's legitimate, honestly. He had no way of knowing that was actually stolen if it had never been reported stolen, right? He only learns it when he decides to actually sell it himself, which turns out to be the wrong move. If he had actually kept it as promised or as preferred at the beginning, as part of his personal collection, the tale may have just ended there. As always, greed seems to be the mover of the plots here. Mr. A mentioned the inventory that had been taken of Lennon's possession after his death, which was referred to in the judgment. He claimed that only 2 watches were listed, a gold watch, presumably the Patek, and another that Mr. A said was a pocket watch Ono had auctioned through Sotheby's in 1984, 2 decades before Karsan swore she gave him the Patek, right? That's Turkish personal driver's account was that Yoko Ono gifted him her husband's Patek in 2005. Mr. A pointed to Ono's own version of the story. Following the death of the late John Lennon, the Swiss court's judgment reads, in a summary of a deposition that Ono gave to the investigators from Berlin at the German consulate in New York City, Ono wanted to give something belonging to her to those who had worked very faithfully for her. So she told Karsan to take a watch. Ono, however, added that she had in no way meant the watch she had given the late John Lennon. What watch did she mean? Mr. A asked rhetorically. That was only the Patek. Right? So the plot thickens in a way, because if she, perhaps in a vulnerable situation, perhaps in the way of a very naive and mostly unintentional or unintended offer, may have actually given the watch away, but that's now where the courts have leaned so far, right? The process more or less basically exhausted the internal Swiss judicial system. All of the appellate courts actually deciding so far in Yoko Ono's favor, with the Swiss Supreme Court's decision still pending. Christie's, informed that the watch had been stolen, kept the 24.99 secured in its Geneva vault, where it sat for several years. The judgment states, on December 17, 2015, the parties and Christie's SA entered into a consignment escrow agreement under which the watch would be consigned to Mr. A's lawyer until agreement or right is adjudicated on the property. Christie's did not respond to a request for comment. Mr. A told me, Fielden continues, that he eventually decided to go on the offensive. In 2018, he initiated a civil lawsuit against Ono to prove that he was the Patek's rightful owner. What Mr. A never expected was that his fate would become intertwined with that of Auctionata, which went bankrupt in early 2017. Brian Harkins says it sounds like a Batman villain plot. I hope my reading helps with that interpretation, Brian. I hope I'm putting enough emotion into it. Seb Nelly, hi all, nice to see you. And JB says, savages had their eye on that piece, eh? Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, the fact that that person, the driver, initially walked away with all that stuff already feels a little wrong, right? If it were just the watch, in a way, there are parts of the account that can seemingly justify that behavior, right? In the sense, if Yoko Ono actually gifted a watch, if not the watch, to this person, by all means. But the guy literally walked away with an entire room full of possessions, out of spite and seemingly looking for some profit from selling a departed man's belongings, no less. So it sounds pretty low, to say the least. What Mr. A never expected was that his fate would become intertwined with that of Auctionata. This is that disruptor online auction platform from Germany, which went bankrupt in early 2017. A German court brought in a bankruptcy expert and lawyer named Christian Graf Brockdorff. Seems to be of aristocratic origin, speaking of villainous plots and interesting names. So Graf Brockdorff, who in a review of the company's inventory stumbled upon the 80-odd other Lennon items that Erhan G had consigned for high six-figure sum. I doubted that everything that had happened in the past was legally correct, Brockdorff told me in an email. He contacted the police, a criminal case was opened, and Erhan G was found guilty of knowingly dealing in stolen goods. He served a 1-year suspended sentence, having admitted that the story that Karsan had told of how he got the Lennon items did not correspond to reality. An Europol warrant was issued for Karsan, whose whereabouts are unknown. He could not be reached for comment. Karsan was the name of that driver of Turkish origin who was a personal assistant to Yoko Ono and who was the initial person who walked away with the watch in 2005 from the Dakota apartment in New York. That the case itself ever came to be is curious, but its verdict set a legal foundation that the Swiss judgment cited in declaring that Mr. A is not the watch's rightful owner. So the fact that a German court decided that all of these Lennon belongings in Auctionata's inventory were stolen was taken as a precedent for the Swiss case, where the judgment declared that Mr. A is not the watch's rightful owner, in the same way that those personal effects that had once belonged to Lennon and that were still in Auctionata's inventory were considered stolen or were judged to be stolen by courts. According to Guido Urbach, a knowledgeable Swiss attorney, it's unlikely that the Supreme Court will decide any differently. Here's the watch once again in all its glory. An example of a second generation, of only the second reference of Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronographs in yellow gold, the reference 2499J, retailed by Tiffany and Company in New York and inscribed by Yoko Ono to properly commemorate her personal birthday gifts to her husband, John Lennon, on the occasion of his 40th birthday. Celtics are apparently NBA champions. Jake Brooks says, with a watch like this, do you think that ignorance is bliss, not knowing where it's from? I don't know. Honestly, JB, that wouldn't make much sense, would it? I mean, the person, the so-called Mr. A, clearly bought the watch um, because it was John Lennon's watch with a very clear provenance and with the proof being in the pudding, and that pudding being the case back inscribed very personally. So, that being said, of course, if what you want is simply a particular reference or a specific kind of watch, you are in fact going after a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph of this particular vintage, reference 2499. Yeah, in most cases, an archival extract is all you need as a reassurance, right? You don't really need to know where the watch went before it arrived to you. And again, that archival extract in and of itself, and we were reading in the article earlier, means that at least the watch has not been officially reported stolen, right? So that is enough peace of mind for most collectors. We are continuing with the story of John Lennon's misplaced Patek, a story that was uh, unearthed, or rather filled in rigorous detail, by Jay Fielden in an article published in the New Yorker earlier today, titled "In Search of Lost Time" in the print edition, and "The Strange Journey of John Lennon's Stolen Patek Philippe Watch" in the online version that we are reading together here. In a series of follow-up emails, I asked Mr. A, Jay Fielden continues, about what John Lennon's Patek meant to him. And this might go some way of answering your question, JB. "I'm more of a Rolling Stones man," he replied, mentioning he has played bass in a local band for years. Um, yeah, yeah. You know, I don't want to alienate anyone really, but I've always thought Beatles were overrated, and John Lennon is probably the most overrated of all Beatles too. My favorite Beatle is George Harrison by a country mile. But let's not get into that. Still, to own the JL watch, Mr. A says, is really a double good feeling, he said, adding that he remained hopeful that he could wear it as soon as possible. Obviously, if by some freak accident or some surprise verdict, he actually is given the rightful ownership of the watch, he will just turn around and sell it on public auction. We all know this. I'm sorry to be this cynical, but we know the watch market enough, and we know this particular kind of collector well enough that the behavior is all too predictable. And it's not unfair, right? Because Mr. A previously, when he was buying the watch from Erhan G, the middleman who brought the watch to Germany, um, he had said that he wants to keep it in his personal collection, even though he literally just turned around and tried to sell it at Christie's Geneva. But if the Supreme Court confirms the appellate court's ruling, the watch will likely return to New York. It's important that we get it back because of all we have gone through over it, Sean Lennon told me. He added, "I'm not a watch guy. I'd be terrified to wear anything of my dad's. I never even played one of his guitars." He paused. "To me, if anything, the watch is just a symbol of how dangerous it is to trust." He also sounds like he will um, sell the watch on public auction if the Lennon family if Yoko Ono / Sean Lennon actually ends up being granted the ownership of the watch as a result of the final decision by the Swiss Supreme Court. Brian makes a good point. I think if you buy a watch for that price, you would want to know the history of the watch. I mean, in this case, clearly, that particular history mattered. But Mr. A seems to have not confused himself with some of the more uncomfortable details. But as you guys know, truth always has that curious way of emerging. The watch never seems to have given anyone peace and happiness for long. Fielden opines, when Lennon was in Bermuda writing what he described as the best kind of songs, the ones that come to you in the middle of the night, Ono was spending time with Sam Green, whom the Times once described as an unabashed poseur, blessed with good looks. Green had a way with rich and eccentric women. He had an affair with the Bacalite heiress, Barbara Baccalant, and by 1980, he was spending his time juggling Greta Garbo, Diana Vreeland, and Ono. Looking through Green's papers, which are at Yale's Beinecke Library, I got an eerie feeling. I found a number of diary entries that corroborated his close relationship with Ono, Yoko all day and night, numerous notations read, and a handwritten tally for more than $25,000. The cost of furniture that Green had sourced to appoint the Hit Factory studio. Whether Green was the one who suggested the Patek as a birthday present for Lennon is hard to confirm, but the cursed history of the watch invites speculation. The secret engraving, which I found in the never published auctionada photo of the watch, is haunting in another way. Parenthetically, just like Starting Over, Love, Yoko, November 9th, 1980, New York City. Was there a new start? By the time Double Fantasy was finished, Ono had lost interest in Green, and Lennon, who had just written and recorded no fewer than 4 love songs about her, appeared to be a happy man. The weeks they spent together at the Hit Factory that year had been charmed. The weeks they spent together at the Hit Factory that year had been charmed, which means that the Lennon Patek captures a measure of time that no other watch ever will. The little they had left together. A nice story, and once again, this is finally John Lennon's lost Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph that has been just accounted for with thanks also in parts to Jay Fielden's story here that was published earlier today in the New Yorker. It's a yellow gold example of a watch that has been made in less than 350 examples. I believe the exact number is 349. It is presented here on a black lizard strap with a matching classic Patek Philippe tang buckle in 18 karat yellow gold with an opaline white dial, co-signed, double stamped, also by Tiffany and Company, which was the New York-based Fifth Avenue retailer from which Yoko Ono bought this watch. That was the curious story of John Lennon's Patek Philippe Perpetual Calendar Chronograph. We are also at the threshold of the first hour of our live stream. So if you have enjoyed the stream so far and learned from it, please hit the like button. If you have just stumbled upon this channel, please subscribe. I'm here with watch content practically every day. Live streams are some of my strengths, but the variety of the content on the channel is increasing, a lot of which will arm you with insight on the watch market, which will allow you to make educated decisions. A lot of that content is listed in the playlist called Wealth Hunter, where I look at particular models, genres, and complications, choose a handful of examples, 3 to 4, and do a kind of snapshots, historical and horological analysis, both teaching you a little bit about that particular model, about that particular kind of watch, but also showing you where you can get decent deals on it. So here's a link to that playlist. St. Peter, hey man, welcome back. Good evening, YB and family. Hope everyone is well. Love this Lennon Patek. And remember, guys, I have just posted about it on Instagram too. So feel free to click this link and show some love there. Double tap and give it a like and leave a comment if you will. If you want to support the channel, you have a number of options that are outlined in the video description. And of course, YouTube gives you already in the form of super chats and everything else, channel memberships, which will give you access to exclusive archive of contents. Anyway, so much for me shilling for my content. But while we are on this historical tenor, I've come across something quite interesting. It's not a one-of-a-kind item per se. It is actually a limited edition piece. It is an epistle, so to speak, by the famous American writer John Steinbeck, called The First Watch. An example of it is going to go on the block at a Sotheby's auction that is coming up at the end of this month on June 26th. The subtitle of the piece is called An Exploration of Unfulfilled Expectations, and this is one of 60 copies. The first 10 of which were reserved for the author, and the rest of the copies from number 11 to 60 were distributed by the publishers at Christmas 1947. First Watch reprints a letter from Steinbeck to Esquire editor Arnold Gingrich. In it, the author thanks Gingrich for a watch, but uses the letter as a vehicle to explore his unfulfilled expectation of such a timepiece for his graduation from junior high, high school, and eventually Stanford, from which he never graduated. So this is actually a personal letter from John Steinbeck to Arnold Gingrich, who was the editor of Esquire at the time. And it turns into a letter, or rather, it turns into an essay, an exploration specifically of unfulfilled expectations. And those unfulfilled expectations apparently are of a similar kind of watch, similar to the one that Mr. Gingrich gifted him, that he would have liked to have received for his graduation from junior high school, and eventually from college, which is something that he never quite achieved. Apparently, this particular example is number 58 out of 60. I never knew of the existence of this particular letter. I've never read the full text. I might actually bid on it, but it has already reached 1,200 US dollars. The estimated value is 2,000 to 3,000. It seems a little bit above my pay grade, but perhaps someone else in the community would be interested by something like this. So I'm sending the link in the chat. Here's a little snippet. I'm trying to reorganize myself. Am I too old? My bones are brittle. I have some times to get up in the night. I feel that my fecundity is not eternal, writes a John Steinbeck, who is, I think, about 45 years old at the time. I can feel the years a little, particularly just before a rain. And now, when the green stick of my youth has so forth and so on, now I get a watch. I wonder if such things always come too late. I wonder if I can go back. I wonder, for that matter, if I can tell time. Well, I thank you. It was a beautiful thought. I only hope that whereas my youth and young manhood were dull and drab and timeless, my later years may not be over gay, over timely. I hope you haven't ruined my life by resurrecting something I thought dead. But I do thank you. You know, I'm dreadfully sorry I didn't meet you in Chicago this fall. Maybe next time. Sincerely, John Steinbeck. This is pretty good. This chap seems to be a decent enough writer. Would be an interesting booklet to explore if it didn't cost a few $1,000s. And I think it's relatively short, by the way. Probably, a few pages. I don't think that's the entire extent of the letter. I think it is a little longer than this, but it's not a very extended piece, so to speak. All right, having gone through those historical touchstones, John Lennon's Lost Patek and John Steinbeck's musings over his late acquisition of a timepiece, we can come back to our concern of late, which are auction results. Overall, having looked at some of the recent results from New York, especially from Sotheby's important watches and fine watches, we have seen how even the most desirable, most aspirational pieces, in the setting of public auctions in a city like New York have been seriously affected by the downturn in the horological markets, and they have been selling for relatively good deals compared to where the prices have stood just about 2 years ago, just a couple of years ago. Now, again, I never prefer officially any financial advice on this live stream. I don't make investment advice on these live streams, so take what I will say with a grain of salt, with a pinch of salt. But I think this is a trend, this downturn in the markets is a trend that we will continue to follow at least to the end of the year, and I think quite possibly well beyond as well. We're looking at the Sotheby's fine watches auction right now. Yeah, Faulkner is a Southerner, whereas Steinbeck was born in California. I think he may have passed away on the East Coast, but he was a California guy. Went to college, as we have just mentioned, at Stanford as well, even though he never graduated. We were looking at the Sotheby's Fine Watches auction. As always, you guys know the deal. If you want me to do a deep dive on any specific lot, if you want me to take a careful look, shine a spotlight, or delve into it with granular historical and horological detail, you just send in the lot number with a super chat, and I will do your bidding. Until then, I will just kind of go by my own feeling. 301 are these toys that feature François Bourgeon. This was a limited edition, I believe, that was released just a couple of years ago. 2 figurines, both of which depict François Bourgeon, a young one and an old one, with 7 of his iconic watches that you can actually make these dolls wear. If, our horological addictions were not already characterized by some weird toy collection, here's something that kind of settles that question. These are really, watches, it turns out, are just toys for grown men or young boys who moonlight as grown men, perhaps. I have to say, these are extremely cute, though. Once again, I don't think I would want to pay thousands of dollars for something like this, but it's a very interesting and charming tribute to F. Bejon as a watchmaker. This was lot 301 in the Sotheby's New York Fine Watches auction, and the lot sold for $2,280 in US dollars. Jake Brooks, thank you so much. You are also a member of the channel and a very frequent contributor. $19.99 in US dollars, a chrono, a diver, and a dress watch. What's your favorites? Wilfs. Wilf Hunter obviously is a series that I came up with since I've been watching too much porn, from my teenage years onwards. The real ones will remember the legend that was called MILF Hunter. Wilf Hunter is yours truly, and Wilf stands for Watches I'd Like to Find. A chrono, a diver, and a dress watch. Please specify, JB. Of course, you don't have to super chat again, but just in the form of regular chats, would you like me to talk about vintage pieces? Would you like me to talk about pieces that are available now at retail, contemporary watches, or kind of a mix of it all? It will be much harder to answer if it is not specified in any way, but I'll still do my best to respond to your question. That will, because that changes everything. If it is something vintage, I have a different answer. If you're talking about pieces that are available currently on retail, that's another response, another answer entirely. I do want to look at some of these pieces very quickly while I wait for JB to clarify his question a little bit. You guys know the two-tone version of this is one of my all-time favorites and one of my prized possessions as well. You're looking at a 1675 GMT Master. In 18 karat yellow gold, here mounted or simply presented on a black calfskin leather strap. It is the 4-digit model, so 1675/8 with the classic nipple dial that has here taken on a rather muted shade of brown, maybe a maroon-like tone. The case from the back seems healthy enough, although not impeccable. Nevertheless, the hallmarks for the gold case are quite nice and legible. And in the absence of a matching bracelet, this piece seems to be a decent example of the GMT Master in gold, in precious metal from the late 70s. Nipple dial once again, and the bicolor 24-hour rotational 24-hour bezel, which again could have been crisper, but is still in decent condition. and this lot 319 sold for 18,000 US dollars. JB says, from this auction, not counting the dolls made in 90s. Okay, so from this auction, we are choosing a dive watch, a chronograph, and a dress watch. I think I showed some favorites before, so maybe I will try to add to them. But as a dress watch, I think this Reverso Ultra Thin is a great one. It's the tribute to 1931 in 18 karat pink golds, the 5N pink golds that they're so proud of, an example from 2011. Around 2014, they also released a version of this with a chocolate brown dial that I like even more. If you like the rectangular style as a genre of dress watch, you can hardly find any better options within this range. I think both are stunning. I do prefer the chocolate brown. That being said, I'm gonna look for another example because we had talked about lot 308, which sold for right like a smidgen over $10,000, which is a decent enough deal for that particular watch. For the chronograph, I had already talked about a piece here as well. I will go back and show you that. I think it's on the next page, if I'm not mistaken. Pum, 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 pum. Okay. My apologies. I guess we went right ahead, or maybe I'm getting confused since we have been talking about a lot of different auctions recently. Okay, let me see. Oh no, that was from the other auction. Now I'll have to, in either case, I will have to renew my choice. One of the Daytonas would be altogether too predictable. If I'm passing over them in silence, don't judge me. Even though I like the neat single chronograph register, that sort of bullseye style register in Nautilus chronographs. You guys know I'm also not a huge fan of the Nautilus as a design, so I will pass over them in silence as well. Hublot is most certainly not for me. I've never liked the chronograph versions of the Royal Oak either. So I will actually choose This one, lot 639, which is the pink gold version of what I already have, with the blue dial. It's a matte and a very dark blue. Big eye minute totalizer at 3 o'clock. Syringe hands, oversized Arabic numerals inlaid with luminous material. The fusile hand for the minute counter, continuous running seconds at 9 o'clock, and 12-hour counter at 6. The Breguet reference 3800 BR Type 20 Aeronaval. That is my favorite from this particular auction, with the lot that sold for 20,400. That it's sold with the bracelet, of course, is an added bonus. As an alternative, lot 630 is also a piece that I like a lot. This is the second, from the second generation of Vacheron Constantin's sporty watch series overseas. The chronograph version with the big date indicator at 12 o'clock in stainless steel with the white dial. There are variations of this watch that I like a little more than this, especially again with the big eye minute totalizer at 3 o'clock. But this is a cool one too. Lot 630, which sold for 13,200. So we have the dress watch. We have the chronograph. Now we need a diver and maybe also another alternative for the dress watch as well. I think I will go with something relatively predictable for another choice for the dress watch. This is 350. Lot 350 is an example of reference 2526, which was Patek's first self-winding piece, their first automatic Calatrava, here in a yellow gold example from 1955, with a white enamel dial from the first series. This particular one is perhaps not the best example in terms of condition that I've ever seen, but it's quite beautiful still. I love the double P symbol on the crown as well, in addition to the enamel dial. And the movement has a beautiful decorated rotor that is so good looking that some collectors actually ordered bespoke sapphire crystal casebacks for this watch so that it could be proudly exhibited. This Patek Philippe Calatrava reference 2526 at lot 350 sold for 24,000 US dollars, and it was a yellow gold example with a white enamel dial. Okay, they need to be made in the 90s as well. That's what you meant. Sorry, with that dull joke, I kind of got my wires crossed. So will I have to start again? Yeah, so if we go with 90s pieces, which we can use the filter, I think, maybe, to set. No, the filter doesn't actually have years. We'll have to be a little, well, if we get stuck to the 90s, I think most of what we will choose here will be from Rolex. The Neptune is a 90s classic. Some people mostly hate it, but the moon phase version that you're seeing here in stainless steel with its unique, kind of reptile scale style bracelets, I really like it. I hate the fonts that are used in the dial. Honestly, I hate the kinds of hands they used. I kind of like and even love the fish mouth style crown guards. The general design of the watch, case, bracelet, the micro rotor movement that powers it, I really love. But the dial design and the handsets, I genuinely hate. So if I ever had an example of this, and I would like to have one, if money were no object, I would most certainly, take it to someone like Josh Shapiro and say, hey, can you make me like a custom hand guilloche dial for this? And, we will design some matching hands so that we actually do justice to the great micro rotor movements and what is otherwise, at least to my taste, a great integrated bracelet watch design, a classic from the 90s, the Patek Philippe Neptune, here presented in stainless steel, reference 5085 line 1A. This example sold for 18,000 US dollars at lot 347. Just 1 second. Okay, quick Patek talk. Thanks to a generous contribution by our I Love Maldives. I do want to highlight, since I didn't live up to the 90s designation, I will choose the Chrysoprase Dial Daytona Beach Edition, lot 514, which sold for 48,000 US dollars. That came with a service card. But let's see, we are going to talk Patek. I think you sent me some Instagram messages. I Heart Maldives. Let me see what you were asking specifically. Ooh. All right, let's take a look. We're looking at 3 examples from Patek's current catalog. You guys remember we looked at one of these watches yesterday in the form of an auction result. Actually, I think it was in the important watches auction, New York watches. Oh, results. Okay. Sorry. So let's start with the 5740 line 1G. This, in so many ways, is the apex predator of the Patek Philippe range, the most complicated Nautilus, an ultra-thin perpetual calendar. The retail price is 152,000 in US dollars. We had just seen an example of it sell in New York for around $204,000. Including the buyer's premium, by the way. So there is about a $50,000 difference in that particular case. And I think that's a fair enough price. That seems to be the range for which a lot of the examples are listed on Chrono. Of course, we can look at some of the recent auction results from every watch. Let me see if we can do that very quickly. I'll take a look as well and see what some of the recent auction results have been. And yes, as you see, it rides right around $200,000, roughly a $50,000 premium over the retail price. The next model on our charts is the stainless steel Aquanaut, the 5167A on the Tropic style rubber strap, which is right under 25,000 at list, 24,450. And in that particular case, I think the market has cooled down very significantly, but these pieces still carry significant premiums over the list price, almost to the tune of $25,000. But as you can see, there are already examples under $50,000, which would be pure miracle just a couple of years ago. Of course, also entirely outrageous if it were to 7 years ago, but that's another story. Meaning that we are talking about a $20,000 premium here, which brings us to 70,000 in total. The last watch that you listed in your three-piece selection from the current catalog was this Métier d'Art example of the Golden Ellipse, 5738 line 51G. This is a Golden Ellipse in white gold with a hand engraved and black enameled dial in matching 18 karat gold, actually. I'm guessing this is a piece that might be relatively difficult to find on the secondary market due to limited number, although I'm pretty sure it's not impossible. But the price points might not be entirely informative for that reason. This is at retail around 77,000, and it seems that it can be gotten around that price, basically. Okay. Yeah, maybe with a slight premium of 5,000. So overall, you're looking at 70 to 75,000 premium if you were to acquire these three pieces on the secondary markets over retail. We're talking about the 5738 line 51G, the fine arts example of the Golden Ellipse in white gold with a hand engraved dial, a stainless steel example of the Aquanauts in, on a rubber strap, and finally the reference 5740, which is the ultra thin perpetual calendar encased in a white gold iteration of the Nautilus. And I'm seeing also in your private message that you also have the idea of this three-piece. Let me kind of go back to this. If you had to go down to 3 Pateks, and that would be the 5167A, the stainless steel Aquanauts with the Globescape dial on the rubber band, 5740 line 1G, the Patek Philippe Nautilus perpetual calendar in white gold, and the 5078 P-001, the platinum minute repeater with the white enamel dial. So you have steel, gold, platinum, all white metal, but in 3 distinct variations: black dial, blue dial, and white dial. And these are all, by the way, very fascinating. Sorry, this is, we're talking about the 5164 line 1A. Sorry, since we were talking about the simpler time and date version of the watch, I got a little confused when I looked at it quickly. This is a more pleasing variation, if I have to put it that way, right? You have on the left, you have like a, true blue sports watch, very utilitarian, in one of the most pleasing and fan-friendly complications, which is dual time, or what Patek calls travel time, the 5164 A in stainless steel. It is a black dial, but it's quite vibrant is perhaps not the word, but that globescape design with the slight gloss of it has a lot of depth to it. So it's not a simple black. And I appreciate that. Same thing. So you have the sports watch on a rubber band. That's also a travel watch. You have something a little more luxurious, a little more chic, and certainly much more complicated, but something that still wears as a dress watch in a way, even though it's a sporty design and it has that vibrant nautical blue on the dial. That's the 5740 line 1G, the ultra thin perpetual calendar in the form of a white gold Patek Philippe Nautilus. And then you have kind of the ultimate dress watch / conversation piece, platinum on leather band with a white enamel dial. Again, a white dial, which is very plain, very simple, very beautiful, but also in one of the most stunning executions of it, of course, in white enamel, grand feu enamel. The blackened hands, yeah, that kind of looks perfect to me. Again, not being a huge fan of the 5164, not being an immense fan of the Nautilus overall, but 5740 is my favorite Nautilus of all time, and I do like the Aquanauts otherwise. So that's pretty cool. Just to reiterate, just to quickly go over it, when it comes to the earlier trio, the 5167 in stainless steel, the 5740, and the 5738, you are looking at about $70,000 to $75,000 US dollars as a premium over retail if you were to acquire these pieces on the secondary market. That's what it looks like. And beyond that, I have to say, I kind of like what you already have in your Patek Philippe collection. So I don't know if you need in any way to modify what you have. But if the end game is a trio that includes still your beautiful minute repeater, a Nautilus perpetual calendar in the form of the 5740 line 1G, I'm game. And 5164 might not be my personal favorite when it comes to these watches, but it's still a pretty damn good watch. and it's probably one of the most useful, one of the most utilitarian and best everyday wear watch that Patek Philippe has in the catalog, probably. So I can't fault those three choices. What's my three from the current catalog? From the current Patek Philippe catalog, I think you already have two of them down. So the easy way of describing my choices would be to add your two on the right. So I would get the 5078P. I think, do they still have the black enamel dial in the catalog? I don't know off the top of my mind. I think I might prefer the black enamel dial, just for kicks. You know, fuck variation. I think black enamel is just gangster. You know, I would really like that. Not sure if they have it in the catalog still. I'm checking right now, but I would really like the 5078P if they had it in the current catalog with the black enamel dial. Oh wait, they don't even have the. They don't even have it in the catalog anymore. Okay, which means that we have a little bit of room to play. Okay, let me make my own choices in that case. I heart Maldives. Let's start from scratch. I'll start with the easiest one, which is something I've always wanted. I do love the new bracelets that they have for this pink gold version, but the dial is not as impressive for me. So I will have to go with the 5738 in platinum with that electric blue white gold dial, the heat blued white gold dial, worthy of the name Golden Ellipse. That would be my first choice from the catalog, 5738P, the Golden Ellipse in platinum with the blued gold dial. I would choose the 5167A with the Tiffany dial, just to address that problem of negative space at around 6 o'clock. Again, since we're talking about a hypothetical scenario, why not go with something I would actually want? And I think I would also like, you know, since we are once again just existing in this dream world, I would like to get this beast, the 531650. Is it too much? Am I allowed to make this choice? because this is kind of, everything but the kitchen sink, but so beautifully executed, and also in a way that makes it look very contemporary without diverging too much from everything that is conservative, simple, and distinguished, everything that makes Patek what it is. I think 5316 line 50p is just that watch. Perpetual calendar with a retrograde date indicator, moon phase indicator, leap year indicator, tourbillon escapement, um, of course, chiming functions, the fumé transparent dial. Yeah, everything that I would want in it. If I have to stick to the minute repeater genre, I would love this piece with the flanqué enamel dial, 5178G. I think those are basically my two. Yeah, that was cool, JB. I think you showed that to me, right? This was a doctor you have seen at a meeting that had the Tiffany blue Nautilus on the wrist. But yeah, that's me. If I can go all the way, I would like the 5316 line 50p. If not, 5178G as a consolation price. The classic Aquanaut in stainless steel, and the golden ellipse in platinum with the blued gold dial. Those would be my three choices from the current catalog Maldives. Thank you again for your contribution, and I look forward to the episode on Thursday, which I will post soon. It will be at our usual time, 8 p.m. on the West Coast, 11 on the East, talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger's watches, his pieces that have been sold so far on public auction. So coming back to our auction results that we were discussing. I know I was trying to respond to JB's request and I mangled it a couple of times. So to pay it respect once again, since we were looking at 90s pieces, the Daytona Beach series, of course, is from right around year 2000, since these are watches that were powered by the in-house caliber 4130. I will try to squeeze in this as a choice. The white gold Rolex Cosmograph Daytona, reference 116519, presented on a lizard strap with the matching 18 karat white gold déployant clasp. That lizard strap also color coordinates with the semi-precious stone dial that is rendered here in chrysoprase. This was lot 514, sold for 48,000 US dollars. The white gold with the meteorite dial. It's not a bad option, come to think of it. Also a piece that's in early 2000s rather than 90s, but I hope you will indulge me, JB. That would be my choice for a chronograph. All too predictable, of course, a Rolex Daytona. But once you push the timeline to 1990 or beyond, I think it's not, it's not a surprise. When it comes to dress watch, again, post 90s, but not too current. Let me see what I can find in this particular selection, which is a link that I will post in the chat here. I'm really not a Panerai guy. There are some interesting options when it comes to that, but I just couldn't bring myself to choose any of them. And we said 2011 was a little too late. So let's see. We're gonna move. I think I would probably go, in that case, I would go with a 5110, again, early 2000s rather than 90s, but please indulge me. The Patek Philippe World Time in yellow gold. Guilloche dial center, the World Time function, and the micro rotor movement. Absolute classic, incredibly sleek, sits close to the wrist. I think this is a beautiful dress watch. At the end of the day, it really just shows you the time in a very elegant, relatively uncluttered, extremely practical way in 24 different time zones, in 24 different cities at once. This was lot 353 that sold for 26,400. The reference 5110 in yellow gold. Then you had said diver. I have a hard time choosing any of the Patek sports watches to respond to that, since they have literally recently come clean, certifying all their watches waterproof at around 3 Atmos, which is crazy, of course. I think if I were to push that dive watch category towards sports watch, I might be able to come up with something from 90s or early 2000s, maybe. Hmm. I don't think I can because I don't want to choose any Panerai. Um, and I don't simply want to choose a Submariner either. I think we're stuck. You stumped me with with this extremely specific request of a 90s diver. Yeah, the only answer I can give to that is to go back to page 1 and point you to one of the Rolex pieces. There's no other way of really answering that in a way that's satisfactory to me. Maybe 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 this way, but that's also 2010. No, I'll have to go. Yep, there you go. 16600 Sea Dweller. We go with this. Lot 303 that sold for 9,600 in US dollars. Okay. Now, since we have taken a good look at a lot of the watches that were sold in this auction with JB's nudging, maybe I can focus on a number of pieces in the remaining 20 minutes or so that have come to my attention while I was scouring rather through the auction results to find his specific requests. Lot 362 is one of my favorites, actually, and one of the good deals, usually in the world of Patek Philippe perpetual calendars. You're looking at the 5040G, which is the Patek Philippe perpetual calendar in a white gold barrel-shaped case, a tortue case, really. It's a very similar design to the Cartier model. This particular example comes with its box and papers as well as the accompanying literature. The dimensions of the case are 35.5 by 42.5 millimeters. So great dress watch dimensions. Silver dial, very classic perpetual calendar look in the barrel-shaped case with Breguet numerals, accompanying set of Breguet hands. an aperture for the moon phase indicator at 6 o'clock, which is surrounded by a pointer date. The months are shown at 3 o'clock. That encircles a leap year indicator as well. And at 9 o'clock, an indicator for the day of the week surrounds a 24-hour hand, which serves also as a day-night indicator. Of course, both of those indicators, I mean the day-night indicator and the leap year indicator, is for your convenience of setting this watch, since you don't necessarily want to mess up the movements. One of the highlights of this watch is its thinness, which is largely facilitated by the microrotor movement, which comes from the lineage of caliber 240 with the 22 carats gold oscillating weight. Since this particular piece is from year 2006, it does actually carry the seal of Geneva on one of its bridge plates. That was the standards, testifying to the standards that Patek adhered by until around year 2009. This example of the threes, this example of the Patek Philippe Perpetual Calendar 5040G at lot 362 sold for $45,600 in US dollars. At lot 373, a watch that we were just looking at, this is a relatively early example of it. Because the 5167 was actually introduced on the 10th anniversary of the Aquanaut as the jumbo model with a new 40mm case, here in stainless steel, on the rubber band that sits flush with the case and the lugs, repeating a similar pattern to the globescape design of the dial, of the embossed dial. This particular example of the 5167A, the jumbo Aquanaut in stainless steel on a tropical style rubber band, sold for $48,000 at lot 373. The piece was accompanied by some of the product literature, as well as its certificate of origin. We have about 10 minutes, so if you have not hit the like button yet, please do so. It genuinely helps. I can maybe discuss a handful more watches, so if you have any specific requests, please feel free to send in the lot number with a super chat. We're looking at the results from the Sotheby's New York Fine Watches auction, which was the online component of their recent series. This is a very beautiful gem sets example of the FP Jaune tourbillon souverain from around year 2010. This is the one with the dead seconds. It's a platinum example with a diamond pavé dial, as well as a bezel, not to mention the lugs and case flanks, too, that are set with baguette diamonds. A very exquisite example of what is already a very desirable watch. And it's an example that delivered on its promise largely, since lot 415 sold for 576,000 in US dollars. Lot 424 is an example of the reverso géographique. This was basically Reverso's first stab at a GMT/world timer watch. It was part of a series of watches, part of a series of 6 complicated reversos that were introduced over the decade after the 60th anniversary of the design, following the 60th anniversary model in 1991. They were all made in 18 karat pink gold, and they were all produced in 500 examples. The Géographique specifically was released in 1998. It was the 5th in line, basically. One of the best uses, one of the best variations of the watch with 2 faces, with that swiveling case mechanism that allows you for an entirely distinct use and different aesthetics for the second side, for the recto side of the watch. This was again one of 500 pieces. This lot actually had its original presentation box, as well as its outer packaging, not to mention the product literature, and I believe the documents as well. Yes, the certificate of authenticity, etc. This was lot 424, which sold for 33,600 in US dollars. We have one of my favorite variations of what was the Art Deco design that once existed in Audemars Piguet's catalog, named after one of the founders of the brands, Edouard Piguet. This is the rectangular curved case design that had once existed in the AP catalog. Breguet numerals, leaf-styled hands, a very balanced kind of a 4 subdial expression of the perpetual calendar display with a leap year indicator as well as a moon phase indicator. White gold case that has relatively restrained dimensions at 29 millimeter by 48.5. The piece is powered by a round movement, but it is nicely framed with an hand engraved enclosure, which is given a sapphire display case back on the flip side. And this particular example actually came with a setting pin as well as a wooden winding box. And it's sold for a relatively intriguing price point at 18,000 US dollars. I have maybe time to discuss 2 more watches. I'll bring to your attention 1 or 2 more watches unless you have any special requests before I close for tonight. Thank you again. If you have learned anything from this show, if you enjoyed it, please don't hesitate to hit the like button, share the links, help me expand this community. It always helps. The likes you give to this video or the fact that you subscribe does a lot for a small channel like this. If you want to support the channel in any other way, feel free to take advantage of the options that YouTube allows you, or check out the alternatives that I provide in the video description. If not, also the membership is a great option because it will give you access to exclusive content. In either case, I appreciate your presence and support. The fact that you are here already means a lot. Let me highlight 1 or 2 more pieces before I turn in for the night. I really do appreciate you. There's a very interesting Bulgari piece in platinum that is a perpetual calendar. This was basically a Jarajanta design that was inspired by ancient Roman coins that would have the engraving of the name of the emperor around the framing the coin. So he basically rendered that in watch form by engraving the name of the brand twice on the dial. This dial has a very nice kind of copper toned pink shade. It has a power reserve indicator at 6, pointer dates at 3 o'clock, day of the week at 9, and month at 12 o'clock, with a portal-like opening that shows you the leap year that is there within that subdial at 12 o'clock. A platinum piece, as mentioned. .38 millimeters in diameter. My bad, by the way. The scale at 6 o'clock is actually a retrograde seconds indicator. So it's an interesting complication which snaps back to 0 every 30 seconds. Makes it much more interesting as a complicated watch. So this is a platinum perpetual calendar with a leap year indicator as well as a retrograde seconds complication from Bulgari from around year 2000. Limited edition, one of 99 pieces. It sold for $8,400 US at lot 614. Last but not least, we're going to look at lot 619. This is from the now discontinued parts of the Malte series from Vacheron Constantin, because Vacheron Constantin still to this day has a collection called Malte in their catalog, but those are watches with tonneau, with barrel-shaped cases. This collection included many watches with the case design that you are seeing right now, such as the reference 42005. The step lugs have a design that harkens to the talons of, say, Maltese falcon, playing around with that Maltese cross symbology of the brand. This particular reference is actually a dual time watch with a regulator dial, meaning that it has an off-center dial for hours, off-center sub-dial for hours at 12 o'clock, with a particular emphasis placed on the minute hand, which is deployed at the center and given that prominence to showcase the precision of the watch, which is, after all, a chronometer. There is also a pointer date at an oversized, indicated at an oversized subdial at 6, which encircles a smaller subdial for the seconds. And the subdial at 9 o'clock is an additional 24-hour hand, which can be set and also jumped at 1-hour intervals independently to indicate the time in a second time zone. This particular example is in white gold. The case is around 38 millimeters in diameter, though due to the distinct case design with those stylized lugs splaying outwards. It actually feels bigger on the wrist, and it has an officer case back which you can actually open on the hinge to take a look at the mechanism inside. This particular example came with a presentation box, but not necessarily with the papers. And lot 619, which is an example of the Vacheron Constantin Malte in white gold, a dual time wristwatch with a regulator dial that sold for 12,000 US dollars. Thank you, everybody, for being here again. Thank you for your presence and support. Please don't forget to hit the like button on the way out. I really appreciate Jake Brooks, who contributed with this generous super chat today, and Maldives, who has always, of course, generously and genuinely supported the channel in the background. I really appreciate you both and everyone else who has chimed in today. I will see you in the next one. I hope we can talk more about some of the interesting watches today, just like John Lennon's Lost Patek. If you have missed that, please go back to the first hour of this broadcast. I think you will see a very nice and full coverage of that watch. Until next time, take care, stay safe, stay healthy, wear and enjoy your watches. I'll see you. Bye.